What's up, guys? Welcome to the Metal Roofing channel. I'm Thad Barnette. Today we're looking at 5 common pitfalls that we've seen when it comes to project specifications for architects and designers and standing seam metal roofs. And by the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of how to make sure there are no contradictions within the project specs that you're putting together for your project. And I've got Ann and Lori from the Sheffield Metals Architectural Department to help me out. Thanks for being here, both of you.
Good morning, Thad.
Let's jump in and talk about what project specs are in relation to an overall construction project. So Lori, Ann, give me a little bit of context of what we're talking about today.
Sure, I'll jump in only because I just recently found this awesome description of specifications written by one of those specification writing programs platforms. And it basically defined it as a pillar of the design. This is where the materials and the methods that are going to be required for a certain project are called out and placed within the document. Nowhere is that on a plans. It's only in the specifications, those materials and methods that are required. I thought that was brilliant.
And we're talking about the spec writing standard is the CSI 3-part format. And tell me about that real quick.
Yeah, CSI is the Construction Specifications Institute. It's been around for almost 75 years, and they are the founders of the documentation that's used to write specifications. And it sets forth a standard and organized way that everyone uses as a format for the specifications to flow across the board, across the projects.
And Lori, why did you feel this topic would benefit architects talking about the project specs?
It seems very timely right now because as Ann and I have witnessed too over the past 10, 15 years, the evolution of these specification writing programs. And we can almost, I'm sure if both of us reflect on our work over that span of time as well, can say that we have started to see these the trends of these, as we call them, the pitfalls or the contradictions that are happening between the plans and the specs. It's wonderful that there are these programs that, you can reduce your time spent on specification writing. But in the end, possibly, has there been a disconnect between that writing and what's actually being shown in that design?
And a lot of times what's happened too is that it used to be that you, as a product representative, you'd go into a firm, you'd sit down, you have an appointment with a specification writer, a person that handled the specification for that office. And what's happened is that's, dare I say, a dying breed of profession. And that a lot of times now that the project architects are each doing their own specifications. And although we can eliminate some time using these programs, I think we get a lot into a copy-paste situation where you don't have somebody looking at those specifications for each project and kind of delineating what needs to be in that project and what needs to be eliminated.
Makes sense. And you both review dozens and dozens of project specs and plans on a weekly basis. So, no one else that I'd rather have talk about this topic. So let's jump into the 5 things, the 5 pitfalls that you see most often. The first one is the plans do not match the specs or vice versa. So tell me a little bit about what you mean by that.
Well, the glaring one is that we'll look at either one. We'll look at the plans. We see a standing seam metal roof over a solid sheathing, let's say plywood. Now we're reviewing the specifications. We've kind of held that in our memory bank. Now we're reviewing the specifications, and it will be identifying some performance requirements that are aligned with a insulated metal deck. There's going to start the flow of the RFIs into the offices.
Okay, before we jump into the second thing, I want to make sure that everybody understands that the review of these 5 things are in the context of the Division 7 roofing and walls section. So that's what we're talking about today. Second thing, roofing specs list standards like air and water infiltration and penetration standards for walls, not roofs. Let's start with Ann this time. Ann, why is that important to make sure we've got the right system listed here when it comes to standards?
Well, you have testing requirements for each type of product, and some tests can be the same, but typically they're different for walls and roofs. And so if you're calling out specifications or testing information for a wall, but you're trying to specify for your roof, you need the correct testing requirements.
That one is one of the more glaring ones, and it's easy to resolve, but it does need to be called out because there are different values of air and water penetration on a wall system versus a roof system. So it all comes down to the science for sure.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about this later, but it's so important that architects and designers work with their manufacturer who's providing this information to make sure that everything is as consistent within the project specs as possible. And that's what you guys do.
Well, I think you'll find that most manufacturers provide guide specifications, and typically, not always, they're written by a professional specification writer, which we do. And you can kind of rely on those to be your guidance for writing a solid specification for, in this case, a roof, metal roof.
And now getting into our third thing, we're talking about the spec writing software. You can make choices within that software based on the project details, but sometimes those choices aren't made. Tell me a little bit about that, Lori.
Well, that's one of those that is really a sad oversight to see happen because it's just obviously it's right up there with the dog ate my homework. Someone just wasn't simply looking. They didn't finish that step, or their mind was 5 steps ahead. So again, and it might be called out in the plans, but it's still going to require clarification, and which means a step that we're going to have to request through the bidder to the GC to get that clarification from the architect. But truly, when they're choosing the gauge, when they're choosing the width, that's already been determined when we're at that specification writing stage, because we've gone through the product selection and presented all to the owner, the architect has.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lori. And the next thing that we're talking about is color. The fourth thing is the designer might call out a color to be closest to the existing roof color. So what does that mean, Ann, and what do you kind of typically do to handle that situation?
Well, the terminology a lot of times says color to match existing roof. And that leaves it open to interpretation pretty widely, because that roof could be 6 months old, it could be 30 years old. So you have a variation of color there. And although today we use a lot of great PVDF paints on the metal roofing that, prevent color fade and chalking, a roof being out in the environment with dust, pollen, just, everyday dust and debris that happens to land on it, that color is never going to exactly match what was there. And so maybe manufacturer A was specified, and 5 years later, maybe manufacturer B's color closer matches than what was originally put on. But just understand that you're never going to get an exact match. It's like a car driving off the lot. It looks pretty and shiny, but once you start driving it, it's never going to look the same like it just came off the lot.
And I think that's a great point, because the only way to really match a color like that is to do a custom color.
And you don't want to match a faded color. That's
right.
You want it to still look new, right? You're putting on a new roof.
Yep.
Could be a new line.
All right, our fifth thing is sometimes within a spec, on-site roll forming is mentioned when they also talk about factory formed panels. So what happens when that contradiction is listed in the project specs?
Sheffield is a proponent of on-site roll forming, right? So we kind of look for those details, but I have found specifications that in part 1, they will talk about a roll former, on-site roll former having to be UL certified. Great. Well, then you get over into part 2, and the specification in the products calls out factory formed. Well, are either or okay? Do you want one or the other? Again, the contradiction that needs to be clarified Will you allow on-site roll forming, or do you only want factory formed?
And I think the commonality between all 5 of these things is paying attention to detail. Within your design software, your spec writing software, making sure that every step of the way you're paying attention to detail. Let's jump into talking about how important holding conversations with your manufacturer is. Tell me a little bit about that relationship between an architect and the manufacturer.
And I just a comment about the Sheffield guide specifications that we're very proud of, took months, is that it will not allow the person using our guide specifications as they build the spec. It's somewhat intuitive in that it will not allow you to pick a material that's not offered for a certain profile. It's just all not there. And that's all in the specifier's notes. A lot of like-minded manufacturers are using that as well. We're just exceptionally proud of our version in that there are some stopgaps there to prevent some of these pitfalls and contradictions as well. I think it is key to any project. The manufacturers, the product representatives of those companies, these are people that in no way ever want an architect's design or building to fail. We have decades of metal experts on the technical side that everyone is always so willing to share with you what they know, right? That's exactly what they've done. That's what they've done on our side, and that's what kind of built up the foundation of our guide specifications, as well as all of our written material.
And whether it be us or another manufacturer, to encourage, utilizing, as Lori says, the years of knowledge that a manufacturer has. I mean, I personally may not know an answer, but I'm certainly going to know somebody that knows an answer. And, we'd like to encourage the architect to get it right the first time so that we don't have to go back and ask for the clarifications to what their intent is. We want to carry out their intent, right? We want to make sure that they're getting what they asked for. So knowing what you need to do up front, that's going to solve a lot of questions on the flip side.
All right, well, thank you so much, Anne, Lori. Really appreciate your guidance on this subject. If you have any questions, comment down below, or we encourage you to reach out to Sheffield Metals. Our technical and architectural departments will be happy to talk with you about your upcoming project. Subscribe here to the Metal Roofing channel. As always, I'm Thad Barnette. We'll catch you next time.